I've had the Hati S Plus 4K for about 2 weeks and I've extensively tested it. We got shape comparisons and we got motion latency and click latency results against other top tier competitors. And I will say that this mouse is very close to being my new main. Let's go ahead and start. The shape kind of has some vibes to what a small Superlight would be, so the hump is quite centrally located on both of these mice. But the sides on the mouse are where there is massive difference, so the Hati S Plus has quite a lot of curvature towards the front and the back of the mouse, whereas the Superlight pretty much has none whatsoever. The very back on the Superlight also slopes up a little bit more aggressively, which you can definitely notice in terms of how it feels towards your palm. So there is more palm contact on the Superlight than there is with the Hati S Plus. Also overall the Hati S Plus is quite a bit shorter and it's also thinner from the middle, but from the front where it flares out, it is pretty much the same width as the Superlight. Then again, comparing the hand feel versus the Razer Viper Mini, to my surprise, they actually feel quite similar because they both have quite a bit of curvature on the sides. The length is also very similar and they do have pretty much the same height profile, but the Viper Mini has more of a hump on the backside of the mouse, whereas on the Hati S Plus it's more towards the middle of the mouse. So because there's a bit of a hump right here with the Viper Mini, it means that you get more of a palm contact with the middle of your palm than you do with the Hati S Plus, so it's more towards the bottom of your palm with the Hati S Plus. You can actually pretty much even palm grip this mouse as the shape is so good for that relaxed claw, but of course with palm grip you get a lot of contact with your palm and the mouse. And I would say this mouse actually feels better for that palm grip style or a very relaxed claw, as it quite gradually slopes up towards the middle. And quickly looking at how low profile these mice are from the front, so the Viper Mini is a little bit lower profile from the front of the mouse than the Hati S Plus. The Viper Mini is very low profile, but I would say the Hati S Plus is still low profile from the front. All in all, these are both small mice, but for my 19x10cm hands, these shapes feel both amazing. Especially for that relaxed claw where your fingers are quite far up front of the mouse and not as curled as they would be with aggressive claw. So yes, the mouse is small and it can be even compared to the likes of the X2 Mini and the Hati S original one in terms of size. The X2 will overall feel a little bit smaller and especially shorter, but not by that much. The original Hati S shape then again has this more bulkier hump towards the back of the mouse, which makes it so that although they feel different, the size feels quite similar. All in all, I would say that the Hati S Plus shape is quite unique, although it definitely has some inspiration from a few mice. Let's talk about the performance of the mouse and actually start with click latency, as I now have a kit which I can record very accurate click latency results with. With this method I'm basically getting the latency between the mouse switch actuating and the button down event being received by your OS. This is all done electronically, so there is no button travel, microphone or end-to-end latency giving us variables. I haven't actually measured the GPX myself yet, but Tech PowerUp has, and he is using the same method and he got 1.7 milliseconds for this mouse. And the Viper V2 Pro with 4000 Hz is about 0.5 milliseconds. And the results I got for the Hati S Plus wireless 4000 Hz is 1.33 milliseconds and the standard deviation was 0.26. So for click latency, this mouse is the second best wireless one available at the moment, so it does get beaten by the Razer Viper V2 Pro, but it does beat the Superlight. I will say that it should beat the Superlight as it has 4000 Hz polling rate and it does get beaten by the Viper V2 Pro by quite a bit. But I've been reporting these numbers to G-Wolves and it seems that they are all the time looking for better solutions to get lower latency. Alright, let's move on to sensor performance, and when I got the mouse I actually had some issues with polling stability and lost packets. Basically the easiest way to test this is to get a ruler and get the mouse tester application and move your mouse for that 10 centimeters to measure your DPI deviation. With 4000 Hz I would get 1000 DPI, with 2000 Hz I would get something like 1200 DPI, and with 1000 Hz with 1600 DPI I would get that 1600 DPI, which then proved for me that the mouse was not registering enough movement with 4000 and 2000 Hz. I also recommend for you to test polling stability if you got these issues. It should not be stable. For example, here is what mine looked at when I had these. I reported this to G-Wolves and in about 15 or 20 minutes I got a new firmware which basically fixed this all, and the polling rate at 4000 Hz was actually quite stable. Not as stable as with with the Razer Viper V2 Pro, but still very stable, so I didn't notice any issues in game or in use whatsoever. If you're running into any issues with interference or polling stability, I would recommend that you download USB 3 Viewer and you make sure that your Hati S Plus wireless is plugged into its own USB host controller, so it's the only device on that controller. That's something that I recommend for you to do even with the Viper V2 Pro. I've never had any issues with the Razer 4K, but this way I get the most stable polling. Alright, let's talk about motion latency, and the Viper V2 Pro beats the Hati S 4K with about 0.5 milliseconds, so it's something that you for sure will not feel in game. And then the Hati S Plus does beat the X2 with about 0.5 to 1 millisecond with the newest firmware on the X2, so you should not get any penalty with the motion sync. And this is with comparing these two at 1000 Hz, so at 4000 Hz the Hati S does beat the X2 of course much more. The Hati S Plus also has motion sync enabled, and I ran it against the X2 and motion sync disabled with the old firmware, and it did beat it still with about 0.5 milliseconds, so it does seem like the motion sync does not add any latency on the G-Wolves implementation. The build quality on the Hati S Plus is very solid, which is a little bit of a surprise to me considering I've had issues with almost all of my G-Wolves mice previously, but this one actually feels very tanky. They've improved the construction, so there is no side flex, there is no creaking. I hope that no quality issues or creaking or anything like that builds up over long-term use, but for now there is nothing major, but there is slight rattle when I really shake the mouse. Nothing that happens in real use though, so I would say the build quality is solid. And moving from that to the clicks, and these have the CP switches, and these are actually quite weird feeling. Very different to LGM 8.0's, Huano's and Omron's. These have more of a mushy actuation in my opinion. The actuation is light enough so these are easy to spam, and there is no insane amount of travel. Slight button wobble, but there is no creaking. Side buttons are good as they are easy to actuate and they still have the tactile step, and no insane amount of travel either. Scroll wheel is quite light and it has defined steps, and the click is easy to actuate. One weird thing about this mouse is that you basically need this plunger to turn on the mouse, so you have to stick it in and move the switch. It's not the easiest thing to do, but you can do it. It almost seems like G-Wolves has to do something weird with every mouse they make. The Hati S Plus 4K is extremely light at about 50 grams. If you use the provided dot mouse gates, it will be about 45 grams. I'm actually using Vaxi stock feet myself because the dot feet and the default scales are actually quite trash in my opinion. And I could not care less about 1 gram difference in weight. 51 grams is still very lightweight. And the mouse is very well balanced as well, so it does feel very light in your hand. I had a very good time testing the Hati S Plus 4K in game. I broke Kovacs records in about 3 to 4 scenarios and played a lot of CSGO. Tracking, precision, flick shots, everything felt really solid with the tech and the shape that this mouse has. The main thing I had issues with and I had to change was the mouse feet, so the stock ones were just horrific on slightly rougher mouse pads. And at the moment I'm just using these Vaxi stock feet. They do not quite fit that well, but they are still better than the original ones. In the end, with all of these, the Hati S Plus 4K may actually end up being my main mouse. I'm quite excited to see any future firmware updates, and I want to see how close G-Wolves can push the 4000 Hz in terms of performance comparing to Razer. For the final talk about, I have to mention the price, as the mouse costs $160, which is a lot. It equals the Viper V2 Pro, but with Razer you have to get the dongle, which is $15. But with Razer you do get that large corporation customer support, so you are likely to get a new unit if you have any issues. G-Wolves mentions that they won't accept any returns for the mouse, but they will of course service you if you have any issues. And will get you a new unit if yours is faulty, but I myself do not have any experience with G-Wolves customer support. For the price of both of these, I would like both of them to have a more premium soft touch coding, like for example Vaxi, Zowie, and even the Superlight has. The Hati S Plus surface finish is this PBT-like texture by design, but it's not really premium feeling or grippy for me, but luckily G-Wolves does provide these grip tapes with the mouse, and these are actually very high quality and good feeling grips. I will be installing these on the mouse right after I'm done recording this video, so I will maybe give you guys some B-roll about it. But hey, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button, and I recommend for you guys to check out this video for some more information about 4000 Hz polling rate versus 1000 Hz polling rate.